about the tariff piece of it, because I think that is what many economists are, when it comes to the Trump proposal, say that is what's going to lead to the inflation piece more than anything else. You saw those Nobel Prize winners, led by Joe Stiglitz and others, come out and say that. I think you've said that in this mother of stagflation idea. The question I'd ask you, as people are trying to measure the Biden plan versus the Trump plan, is whether you think ultimately he would actually implement those tariffs, or whether those tariffs or the prospect of those tariffs are part of a political bargain, a negotiating effort that he would implement to try to get some kind of better deal out of China later. And that we are sort of, I mean, this is some of the argument that you'll hear from Republicans, that we're sort of not fully understanding, or we're taking at face value the idea that he's going to throw tariffs on China and that's going to blow things up.
First of all, because it supports your question, you've ruled out talking about the conscious effort to trash the dollar. You've ruled out talking about trashing the independence of the central bank, and you've ruled out
I'm getting to all of those
being
things.
Completely fiscally irresponsible. So when you talk about supply shocks in the context of massive, goofy demand shocks, it's a different thing. Point one. Point two, I was not aware that, except for because of some idea of Trump's, that we were talking about and felt a need to have leverage to have a trade war with Europe or Canada or Mexico or Japan or Malaysia. Right. And he's proposing tariffs on the whole world. Third, there's actually a surprising amount of evidence, and political scientists study this stuff, that presidential candidates tend to do what they said they were going to do during their campaigns, particularly when it can be done with executive authorities. So I'm not going to take precisely, literally, the 100% tariffs. I'm certainly not going to take precisely, literally, the idea that he's going to abolish the income tax and replace it all with tariffs. But do I think we will have substantially more price increasing tariffs in a Trump administration? Absolutely. And, you know, the Peterson Institute, they're not really very partisan, and their estimate was that the Trump tariffs we had, which are trivial compared to what he's talking about, would add 2% to the price level. So if we're not talking about 100% tariffs, if we added 6% to the price level and it happened over 3 years, that would be back to 5% inflation. So I don't think that's a very serious argument to be made. And the person who seems to be the guru authority of Trump tariff policy is Bob Lighthizer, and I've never seen him be in favor of reducing anything, ever, for any reason.
Let me ask you about a couple of the other items, though, on the list. I promised I would, and I think one of the most important is the independence of the Federal Reserve. We all read that article in the Wall Street Journal several months ago, front page, suggesting that Trump, or at least people around Trump, believed that they were going to try to end the independence of the Federal Reserve. I'm curious what you thought when you read that, but also as somebody who has worked in government for a very long time, to the extent you can take us behind the scenes, there's always been a question mark, I think, in the public mind's eye about how independent the Fed really is and what kind of influence, implicit or explicit, the president really tries to put on the head of the Fed. And I asked that, I remember talking to Paul Volcker before he passed away, and he said that he got a call and he was told to make his way over to the White House, and he got a talking to. And that was done in private. Trump has done a lot of this in public. Speak to it.
Well, the only thing I can speak to with confidence is the 8 years of the Clinton administration and the first 2 years of the Obama administration, when I was in the room every time. And I can speak with quite a bit of confidence about the last 6 years of the Obama administration, even though I wasn't in the room. And both those presidents were persuaded that Fed bashing was a fool's game, because the Fed mostly didn't listen, so you got lower short-term interest rates, and the market did listen, and so you got higher long-term interest rates. And so it was really not a smart thing to do, whatever your objective is, and that it wasn't actually a right thing to do, because you didn't want there to be inflation, because inflation was hugely politically toxic, and you didn't want to be blamed for the pain that was associated with resisting inflation. And so it served we didn't make the case in some idealistic way out of some economic textbook about dynamic consistency theory. We just said, look, in terms of all the things you care about, Mr. President, and both President Obama and President Clinton immediately recognized the logic of it. And I've talked about these things with Joe Biden, and he understands the logic of it as well. So I think this will be, the kind of experiment that Mitterrand tried many years ago in France, the kind of experiment that was tried briefly in Germany. And the thing about credibility is that it takes we all know this from our own lives and whatever we do in business and whoever we interact with. It takes a long time to build credibility and virtually no time to destroy it. And if you destroy it, you can get it back, but it's really costly and you really have to sacrifice a lot to get it back. So I think it's a big mistake. And look, we saw it. I mean, why did the 70s happen? The single most important reason it happened was Richard Nixon bashing on Arthur Burns. And that was the last major instance of successful White House pressure.
Right.
And it didn't really work out very well for anybody who was involved.
So I have a different question for you.